Welcome to 20th Century Music and Arts. This is the remastered version of episode 2 of the Rise and Fall of Alternative Music. Again, I'm going to be adding video clips, and I'm re-recording this, so hopefully it sounds a lot cleaner and better, and it's an improvement on the original. Enjoy. Then the breakthrough happened. Nevermind began climbing the charts on the success of their song, Smells Like Teen Spirit. This anthem seemed to capture a feeling that was lurking beneath the surface of the culture. The iconic video had the band playing in a high school gym to moshing students, cheerleaders, and an old caretaker. This song launched the sound of the 80s underground into the mainstream. It took a shotgun to the plastic culture that everyone had been sold in the 1980s. By January 11th, 1992, Nirvana had displaced 80s icon Michael Jackson off the #1 position in the charts. The flannel-clad Shaggy band was integrated into the glossy presentation of MTV. Light my candles in our days, 'cause I found God. Soon other bands began to rake in this success as well. From the ashes of Mother Love Bone, a band called Pearl Jam also started gaining immense popularity. Pearl Jam was not as punk influenced as Nirvana was, and had a rock sound that appealed more to the masses. The lyrics dealt with social issues and emotional turmoil, and for people in the mainstream, it seemed very different from the good time rock lyrics that were part of their hair metal scene. Their album 10 became very popular and was a favorite of the critics. The videos for Alive, Even Flow, and Germany would be in heavy rotation over the next year. The sensitive frontman, Eddie Vedder, became an archetype that many a frat boy would emulate. Flannel shirt, long hair, cargo shorts, Doc Martens, and maybe a soul patch or goatee. And Seattle itself came on the map as a place that was recognized as a sort of music mecca. Some bands were able to benefit from this new attention placed on the Washington capital. Within a year, Alice in Chains would climb the charts with the 1992 album Dirt. Mudhoney, with their gritty garage rock dirgy sound, were actually getting some sales as well. Other bands such as Grunge, Tad, and Love Battery got some attention, but were not necessarily getting the sales. The wake of Nirvana's success heightened the whole interest in alternative music in general. The Red Hot Chili Peppers became even more popular with the release of Blood, Sex, Magic in 1991. On the tour, Pearl Jam opened for them along with another band that was not appreciated by the crowd at the time called the Smashing Pumpkins. We will hear about them later. In 1992, the second Lollapalooza festival was held. It was even more massive than the first one. The Red Hot Chili Peppers headlined, and grunge giants Pearl Jam and Soundgarden were on the bill. Other acts such as Ministry, Jesus and the Mary Chain, Lush, and Ice Cube, the rapper, were also part of the lineup, but clearly the focus was on the rising grunge bands and the Chili Peppers. Jane's Addiction's Perry Farrell was still the one behind the festival and had this vision of bringing alternative music to the mainstream. And now it was serious business. One band that was able to become really successful at that time was the Smashing Pumpkins. This Chicago-based band was able to refine the quiet, loud dynamics that Nirvana had borrowed from the Pixies and gave it big production. Leader Billy Corgan took the teen angst and irony of Nirvana's lyrics and presented them in a way that were more palatable to the public. And then the imitators started to appear. The first of these was Stone Temple Pilots, a band based out of San Diego, previously known as Mighty Joe Young. Their 1992 album, Core, took elements from the grunge sound and put it into a more mainstream form. The low-tone gnarl that had been used to describe the vocal styles of Alice in Chains' singer Lane Stanley and especially Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder was imitated effectively by Stone Temple Pilots frontman Scott Weiland. Over the course of the decade, the gnarl would become the standard for rock vocalists, and more overtly commercialized versions of the sound would be spawned in the forms of Creed and Nickelback. However, many of the original fans of alternative music were becoming disillusioned. Seeing the high school jock types who only a year ago had been listening to MC Hammer, but were now wearing flannel and donning other aspects of the grunge uniform, made it look like the music had really lost that edge that had been so attractive to so many people in the first place. Watching those who had been stalwart supporters of Skid Row and Poison praise the sensitivity of Eddie Vedder left me at that time with a really bad taste in my mouth. So what's a music geek to do? They began to scan the underground to find music of their own, and that is what happened. Many people looked to indie rock. Bands like Fugazi, The Jesus Lizard, Polvo, Unwound, and the now defunct Slint, and also Drive Like Jehu. They all started getting more notice. This music was more experimental, abstract, and atonal than anything in the grunge category. Other bands like Pavement, Guided by Voices, and Sebadoh would often use sparse and primitive recording methods to get a gritty sound, like it was recorded in your parents' basement. Critics would dub this production lo-fi. Horn-rimmed glasses wearing music purists could listen to these sounds and feel a sense of superiority to those who were simply getting their cues from MTV.
Lies and betrayals, fruit-covered nails, electricity and lust. I am a scientist, I seek to understand me, all of my impurities and evils yet unknown. You were right, I was battling you, trying to prove myself.
Now, Kurt Cobain was thrust into the spotlight, and his world changed at a rapid pace. He found himself as a spokesperson for a generation, but he tried to tell everyone that he simply did not have the answers they were looking for. He was at award shows with the mainstream artists he despised. Front color of the Rolling Stone and world tours were part of his life. He wanted success, but was not ready to be such a pivotal figure in rock history. His very public and turbulent marriage to Courtney Love was splashed all over the pages of the rock press and the tabloids. The band's follow-up to Nevermind, In Utero, was produced by Big Black leader and miscreant producer Steve Albini. The mix had the rawness that would be appreciated by indie rock and lo-fi music fans. However, the record company could simply not accept the raw, indie-sounding mix and insisted that the album be remixed. Worse still, heroin addiction was overtaking Kurt's life. On a European tour in Italy, he overdosed on pills and champagne, and in April 1994, Kurt Cobain committed suicide with a shotgun. This event is arguably one of the most pivotal events in the history of rock music. That is largely because it was seen as the end of rock music as a genre of rebellion, as a cultural force that young people would believe in to change the world. As seen in the last episode, Nirvana's success was the final stage in a long lineage of music that was going back decades and nurtured by underground music scenes. But their breakthrough was an accident, an event that no record company executive could have foreseen. Now, everything that was permeating the mainstream was carefully packaged and promoted. Nirvana's demise was the demise of rock as a force that gives us meaning. Nirvana drummer Dave Grohl would create the more commercially sounding Foo Fighters and would cement his place within the rock mainstream.
You know the old saying that you can't buy happiness. You think that's true?
Well, yeah, you can't buy happiness. I mean, that made me happy for a little while. But, I mean, I was just probably almost just as happy with, I don't know, I look back on going to secondhand stores and stuff like that and finding a little treasure like that. And that actually meant more to me because it was more of a stab in the dark in a way, because you didn't know if you're going to be able to afford it, and you don't know what you're really looking for, and when you find it, it's more special to you rather than having $1,000 and going into a store like that and just buying the whole store.
In the fall of 1994, two bands started climbing the charts: Green Day and The Offspring. Both of these bands came out of the Southern California pop-punk scene. Punk has always had an element of traditional pop music in it, and in many ways, some punks were trying to take music back to the singles eras of the mid-60s before the psychedelic indulgences took over. Bands like the Buzzcocks and Northern Ireland's The Undertones used saccharine melodies sung over distorted guitars. In the 1980s, numerous bands would emerge from California that took their cues from these melodic British bands. The Descendants, Bad Religion, The Mr. T Experience, Screeching Weasel, Pennywise, and Big Drill Car. Fast beats of hardcore punk merged with pop vocals that fans could sing along to.
Now we are 21, now we have to get things done. People have been done, and time remembers found together with a smile. So put in all things, take the one for this was on my mind. Almost ready, almost there. Is it already over?
Many of these bands were on the labels Lookout and Epitaph. In the wake of Nirvana's success, both Bad Religion and Green Day signed to major labels. Green Day's Dookie became a major success in 1994, and the hits Basket Case, Longview, and When I Come Around went into heavy MTV and commercial radio rotation. The Offspring, still signed with Epitaph Records, had massive hits with their singles Come Out and Play, Self-Esteem, and Gotta Get Away. The combination of simple pop melodies, obvious teen angst lyrics, and well-produced yet distorted guitars created an easily digestible form of teen rebellion that the mainstream loved. The metaphorical dark cynicism of Nirvana was put into a glossy format that emphasized teen culture. Despite having emerged from a punk hardcore underground, there was nothing rebellious about this music. It was like the antithesis of Black Flag or the Bad Brains. By the time the band Blink-182 climbed the charts in 1999, The sound was so clean that it was only a few degrees removed from something like Britney Spears. Like with the skinny tie bands of the late 70s, early 80s, the sound of punk was tamed and packaged for the average consumer. To walk around in the early 80s with piercings, tattooed, and dyed hair was considered to be a dangerous sport. As Social Distortion's frontman, Mike Ness, would state, "We would get beat up by jocks, rednecks, and cops." However, by 1992, these subversive alterations of appearance were becoming an integral part of this mainstream alternative culture. High-quality tattoos were showing up on the bodies of young people. Young men bleached and dyed their hair numerous colors. Piercings of the most uncomfortable kind were now being displayed in the name of individuality. This mainstreaming of social practices were part of the fringe reflected in the artists that were entering the spotlight. Industrial music is a genre that uses ugly sounds from the real world in a musical way. It has its roots in 20th century composers like Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, John Cage, and Edgar Varese, but the label was applied to artists in the late 70s and early 80s such as Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire, Test Department, and Einzelzende Neubauten. As the genre evolved, electronic beats, synthesizers, and samples became an integral part of the music, as reflected in artists like Skinny Puppy and Front 242. The band Ministry would start incorporating heavy distorted guitars and created a powerful metallic album in 1989 called The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste. One man would take this combination of rock guitars and industrial sampling to the mainstream, Trent Reznor. His band, Nine Inch Nails, crafted a more commercially friendly version of Ministry sound and would hit massive success with their 1994 album, The Downward Spiral. Lyrics involving self-hatred, nihilism, obsession, and overt sexual desire permeated this industrial rock sound, and Reznor found himself a darling of the mainstream press. The fringe sounds that one could only hear in goth clubs were now featured in Rolling Stone. However, an emaciated, ivory-skinned demon would take this sound and push the shock value. Marilyn Manson. Using the names of a sex symbol and a serial killer as his moniker, Marilyn Manson, who, like Alice Cooper, was both a person and a band, created a persona that fused the androgyny of David Bowie with the demonic appearance of Gene Simmons. The sound took its cues from Reznor's and would reference goth, electronic, and heavy metal. The lyrics and live shows were there to shock parents. Sexuality, violence, suicide, and even the kind of satanic references that were once the domain of extreme metal were all contained within the songs, along with heavy doses of sarcasm and irony. In the underground scenes of punk, metal, industrial, and goth, these sounds and ideas had been explored before, but had never been promoted to the masses in this way. The band's CDs Antichrist Superstar and Mechanical Animals were being consumed by the suburban mall-dwelling youth. A controversy would strike when two teenagers who maybe listened to Marilyn Manson committed a mass shooting in Columbine, Colorado, at their high school in 1999. Even though he condemned the violence committed by these two young men, the blame was directed right at Marilyn Manson. As a result of this backlash, Manson would never be at the same level of fame. But what Manson's rise to popularity showed was mainstream record companies could even take the sounds of the underground fringe and make them marketable on MTV. A band would emerge in the early 90s that would take direct aim at the injustices of capitalism. Rage Against the Machine. Now, there had been a long history of music backing the proletariat worker against the bourgeoisie, going right back to folk singers like Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. Punk rock bands had a noted history of sticking it to the man, while major label artists like The Clash and even Pink Floyd had scathing criticisms of capitalism on their albums. Many bands in the underground were critical of these artists being part of the corporate superstructure. Bands like the Dead Kennedys and Crass would release albums on their own labels and felt that having the means of production in their own hands would be liberating. Unfortunately, for most bands taking this approach, poverty and limited exposure was the result. But they had the loyalty of the fans of the underground they occupied. Rage Against the Machine was formed in 1991 out of the ashes of glam funk metal band Lock Up and hardcore punks Inside Out. The sound fused together metal with the groove of funk and hip-hop. Singer Zach De La Roca used an aggressive rap-style delivery which flowed over the hypnotic grooves of the rhythm section. The guitarist Tom Morello used the pickups and volume control on his guitar to emulate the record scratching techniques of hip-hop DJs. The lyrics highlighted social injustices of historic and current racism, U.S. foreign policy, and the crimes of the free market. This powerful sound started playing on heavy rotation with the foul language censored out. While the band gave exposure to issues such as the controversial incarcerations of Mumia Abdul-Jamal and Leonard Peltier, they had many critics. Their revolutionary socialist message was being promoted by the Sony Corporation, a multinational conglomerate. People like Ian Mackay of Fugazi pointed out the fact that they say they're against capitalism when the company they work for exemplifies greedy capitalism. Mackay had been running Discord records out of a house since the early 80s and had direct control over the means of production, including the price of CDs and concert tickets. But Morello would point out this to his critics. When you live in a capitalistic society, the currency of dissemination of information goes through capitalistic channels. Would Noam Chomsky object to his works being sold at Barnes & Noble? No, because that's where people buy their books. We're not interested in preaching to just the converted. It's great to play abandoned squats run by anarchists, but it's also great to be able to reach people with a revolutionary message, people from Granada Hills to Stuttgart. But what the situation with Rage Against the Machine showed is that corporations are fine selling anti-capitalistic messages to the public, as long as it contributes to their capitalistic bottom line. Killing in the Name Of was just as much a frat boy anthem as it was a call to revolution. And most importantly, it made money. Taking their cues from Rage Against the Machine's fusion of rock, metal, and hip-hop, emerged a slew of bands that would dominate the music scene of the late 90s and early 2000s. Korn, Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, Stained, Static X, and Kid Rock. Hip-hop clothing, down-tuned guitars, and big production were part of the formula, along with very standard verse, chorus, and bridges. Lyrics dealt with teen angst, politically incorrect attitudes, and in Limp Bizkit's case, the kind of misogyny found in gangster rap. Many of these bands appealed to the white suburban males who like to speak in Ebonics to try and improve their street cred. One of the more creative acts of this genre, the Deftones, evoked the melodies of the Smiths and the Cure. Nu metal was marketed rebellion in a package that used the imagery that was ever present in the ubiquitous teen culture of the late 90s. The big production of these bands were the antithesis of indie lo-fi. This sound was MTV and the suburban mall, and it was often hated by true metalheads as much as hair metal had been in the late 1980s, and most people could see that they were being sold a package. As the 10th year anniversary of Nevermind approached, music critics scoured to find the next band that would lead the new rock revolution. While Radiohead's 1997 epic OK Computer did have quite impact artistically on a cultural level, there had been no absolute game changer like Nevermind. But the critics thought they found a band that could save rock and bring forth the drawing of a new age. The Strokes, this New York quartet, were the students of the city's musical history and took their sound from the great bands of CBGB's and Max's Kansas City, the Velvet Underground, the Modern Lovers, and Television. A massive bidding war began between the labels, and when their debut album came out in the summer of 2001, it was aptly titled, Is This It? The band themselves knew there was no way they could live up to the hype. No one could. And while the album sold very well, it did not create the new revolution like Nirvana had. The reason for this failure was that Nirvana was a happy accident that stood on the shoulders of generations of music that were brewing in the independent music scenes all over North America. The Strokes were forced into creating a revolution that wasn't going to happen. And while the popularity of the Strokes did pave the way for bands like the White Stripes, the Hives, Arcade Fire, and Franz Ferdinand, as mentioned earlier, Nirvana was really rock's last stand as a cultural force for change. It became apparent by the millennium that the corporations had won, and that the raw power that Nirvana had evoked in the early 90s was now a slight echo. While there were bands that played all kinds of rock genres all over the world, there would be nothing like Nirvana again. Over the course of the new millennium, rock music was being overtaken by hip-hop, electronic dance music, girl diva singers, and boy bands. Even those who were connected to the rock genre had a sound so artificial and clean, it could hardly pass for rock music. Is Avril Lavigne or Maroon 5 really rock music? But one positive aspect of the consuming of music in the new millennium was the availability of music on the internet. Young people can easily discover Nirvana, but they can discover bands that influence them. Like people who are getting into classical music discover Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven, or new jazz fans find the path that goes from Louis Armstrong to John Coltrane, Nirvana fans are learning about Sonic Youth, Black Flag, and the Stooges. The revolution is long over, but there is a legacy there that anyone can still unearth. Thank you for listening to this two-part episode called The Rise and Fall of Alternative Music. I'm going to do some follow-up episodes where I'm going to explore the specific subgenres that we have covered in the last two episodes. Thank you for watching 20th Century Music and Arts. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, and let's look at this question. What is your favorite subgenre of alternative music? Are you a big industrial fan? Do you like pop punk? Do you like lo-fi? Do you like indie rock, math rock? Whatever it is, put it in the comments. Thank you. See you next episode.